starting with responsive web design module. When you sign in on the FreeCodeCamp, your page would look like this. And in the previous videos, we went through the HTML module already. If you haven't watched that, you can go ahead and watch the previous videos. But today in this series, we would start the basic CSS and build a cafe menu. So this is what it would look like, and from 1 to 20, it will probably be blank for you guys, but we are starting on day 1 over here, and yeah, go through this entire module. All right, so let's get started. This is what we will be building, and so I wanted to do things a little bit different this time. You have two options. You could either follow along with me as I'm building this same site on an actual web development environment. And you could either do the same things following the steps on the FreeCodeCamp site, or do both. It would actually be good practice if you follow along and go back and fulfill these steps so you can get your certificate by the end of these modules. So, two things before we get started. We need to install our coding development because in a real life we don't code in the browser directly like this. So I wanted us to go through the steps. First, we need to install our environment, and we are going to use a browser, Chrome, and also an IDE, which is going to be Visual Studio Code. IDE just stands for Integrated Development Environment, and it's the space that developers use to code what they're trying to build. So let's go ahead and open a new browser and just type Visual Studio Code. I am using Mac, so that's what I would be downloading. If you're using Windows, go ahead and download that. So you would see that here it gives you those options. So I'm going to choose Mac, but if you have a Windows, you can choose Windows. It will install, and just follow through the instruction, meaning open this and follow the steps. I have already installed it on my machine, so I will continue to the next thing we need is Google Chrome. If you don't have it, then go ahead and just download it by just writing download Google Chrome, or you can use other browsers such as Firefox as well. But I'll be using Chrome. So then you can go ahead and download it if you don't have it. So that's all we need for this tutorial. Now that your Visual Studio has been installed in your machine, go ahead and open it. And what we're going to do first is to create a folder where our project is going to live. So just create a folder. I created one over here. You can do so by right-clicking a new folder and name it the way you want. I named it FreeCodeCamp CSS Project. After you've created the folder, just open it. You can either drag and drop on Visual Studio Code, and your windows would look like this. So now, this is where our project is going to live. Now we need a file inside this project. So go ahead and create a new file, and we are going to name it index.html. And that's going to be the main file where we would write our entire HTML. Now, before we continue if you remember from previous tutorials, we used to write tag element ourselves. In real life, we make it a little bit easier, and to make it easier for us, instead of each time we have to write the whole thing, we use extensions. So you're going to need a few extensions for this tutorial. So on the left side of your Visual Studio Code, go ahead and search for extension. It's right here. Open that, and we are going to need a few of them. The complete list will be in the description down below, but we would need ESLint. So we would take the one prettier, ESLint, and click on install. I've already installed it. And also we would need something called prettier. Click on it and install that. We would also need a live server. Live server. Install that. So a live server will help us view easily the changes we make to our website. And the previous two is just to help us finish our HTML. It's kind of going to guess what we're trying to do, and it will do it for us. We would see that in practice really soon. And since this tutorial is about CSS mostly, we need another extension called IntelliSense for CSS, I believe that's what it's called. Yeah, so this one, go ahead and install it as well. Once you're done, go back and you can close these windows here. We don't need them anymore. And this welcome windows, you can make this side smaller. So now, if you remember from our previous tutorial, we say that an index file always starts with a doc type. So watch what's going to happen. If you just type HTML, you get this list of options. And this is what these extensions that we just installed are doing. So go ahead and choose HTML5, and it generates the format of our entire HTML document. So if you didn't have the extension, you would have to write every single line manually. So that's why we use these extensions for. They're very helpful. So just to kind of review, an HTML format always starts with a doc type. This tells the browser what this file is. And then we have the HTML. Our entire website will live inside this HTML. And inside here, this simply means that the language that we would use is English. And then we have a head. Consider this like an introduction. When you're writing an essay, it's kind of like the introduction in an essay. And these contain things like our title. The title will appear at the top when the browser opens a new tab. We will see that in practice really soon. And our meta tag. This is for things like search engine optimization. You don't need to worry about it right now, just yet. But where we would spend the most of our time is in the body. The body will contain everything that our website will have. So I just like to do a test first to show you guys what I'm talking about. So go ahead and write button. Let's create a button. And you see how the tag has been finished for us. That's the role of these extensions. So let's say hello world. It's a tradition in the tech world to always say hello world. So let's do that. And also let's change our title to cafe menu. All right, and save. So this little bubble up there just means that my changes are not saved. So make sure that before you're able to view your site or your changes, make sure they are actually saved. So I'm going to go ahead and press Command S to save my changes, and now it's all gone. So where do we even see what we've just done, right? And this is where the live server come in handy. So if you come down here to the left, to the right, to the bottom right, click on that, and it will start a new browser and with our button, Hello World. So that's one way of viewing what we've just done. Another way we could accomplish the same thing is if you come here and you right click, come down to copy path. So this is gonna copy the location of this file and open a new browser and just paste it here, and we get the same thing as well. But I like to use the live server because the live server, every time we make a change, if I open it kind of side by side, if I say cafe menu, I don't know, today, and just save, you see how my title is up here, and it also changed without having me to, without even refreshing the browser. So that's what I mean by using the live server. So let's go back and write cafe menu and save our changes. So now we are going to start building this site. So what I'm going to do is read instructions here and kind of do it simultaneously. I will kind of speed through the things that I've already mentioned, but feel free to take your time and try to understand what they are trying to do here. So I know that the first few steps is literally doing what we've already done here, like writing the doc type. So you could either type that manually or just like this. And they want us to write a HTML. And so this is good practice for us anyway. And then inside here, I will type my language and assign a value of EN. Let's check our code. Now let's add the head. And inside here, it needs a title. And the title should be cafe menu. All right, next we need a meta. And write car set with the value of this, and meta as self-closing, so I don't need to do anything. Now let's add a body to this HTML file. And this is where most of our content would live. All right, let's check your code. So inside this body element, let's add a main. And inside this main is where, if you remember, we would have that rectangle and the price as well. So let's add an H1. And copy the name. Check your code. Let's add a P element. So I just added a P element over here. Let's check our code. Now let's add a section. We would have two sections on the menu, one for the list of coffees and one for the dessert. So let's create our first section. Check your code. Now inside this first section, we would have a H2 element, and name it coffee. Okay, so before we continue to step 10, if you want, you can go ahead and do the same thing without looking into our Visual Studio. So let me make this bigger. If you remember, we had a main section, and inside this main, we had our H1. So let me show you something. If you just type H1 and press enter, it opens and close the tag for you. So that's kind of cool. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy our text, Command C or Control C if you have a window, and paste it here. And then after we had a paragraph that said this. So try your best not to look. You can actually close this side. It's just good practice, honestly, but if you're already familiar, you can just skip to the next part of this video. So I'm gonna add so the same way, I'm just gonna write P and tap enter and paste what I need. Then we would create our section. So the same way we would write section, enter. Inside this section, we have an H2. So I would write H2, enter, and write coffee. All right, go ahead and save your changes, and let's look at it in the browser. Voila. All right, now let's continue with step 10. Let's add some style to this website. Find out where the head is, and let's add another element called style. And inside here, I guess that's all they need for now. Let's check the code and go to the next challenge. So let's pause for a second and try to understand what a CSS style is. So a CSS style comprises of an HTML element as well as a property and its value. So this element here is calling on the element that we've mentioned in our HTML file, and the property is specific to CSS, and they have specific value. So let's align this H1 at the center, right? We want this camper cafe to come at the center. So how we do that is by targeting the HTML element that we need. So this is our style. So our style would live here. Later on, we would see how else we could do the same thing. But for now, let's target our H1 element. And then you see that you have to open the curly braces. And inside, we have to add a property. So one of the properties that CSS have to put the header at the center, or the H1 at the center, is text align. So let's go ahead and write text align, and you have to put the column and add a value. So text align have, I think, 3 values at least. We have center, right, and left. So we would write center here. And don't forget to add the semicolon. If you don't add this, it'll be wrong. So let's check our code, and you see how the camper cafe is now at the center. So you might panic and be like, oh, so do I have to remember all this? Again, you don't have to. But before I show you where we find all this information, I'm sure you can guess. It's MDN. We've done that in our previous video. Let's open our actual code and add some style. So you can pause the video and do it yourself, is by adding the style element here. And I am trying to make this H1 be at the center. How I do that is by targeting the H1 element, right? And then opening curly braces, and the property that I'm going to use is called text align. And notice how here, because of those extensions that we installed, we are getting different properties of CSS, so a list of them. So this is one reason why you don't even have to memorize all this, because you know the IDE, or integrated development environment, would help you find these properties more easily. And so we need text align. And also the coolest thing is that it gives you the value that this text align can have. So we see how here it's center, and justify, left, right, start. Over time, when you build more websites, you'll be more familiar with them, and you'll just know them out of practice. So right now we need center. Okay, and go ahead and save your changes, and let's look at them in the browser. You see how our head H1 is now at the center, and that's the same thing we have here. So that's kind of cool why I wanted us to go through Visual Studio Code, because it just makes it more realistic. But this is also good practice, and we want to get this certificate at the end of this module, right? So let's move on to the next challenge. So let's center H2 and P by adding a new type selector for each one to the existing style. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. So we'll have H2, open braces, and text align center. You see how the coffee moved? And I'm going to do the same thing for the paragraph as well. and we have that at the center. Let's move on. So you see how we've written it this way for the same property? This is not good because you're repeating yourself, and we have a concept in development, in software development, which is DRY, standing for do not repeat yourself. If you find yourself repeating the same thing over and over again, think about there must be a better way of doing things, right? And look for those ways. So here they're just telling us that instead of writing all this, it's easier to just write H2 here and P. And then you won't need any of these anymore, right? And so you see it's doing the same thing. So basically what this means is these are called selectors. Selectors are HTML elements. So you've selected this specific HTML element to apply this property, right? Let's check your code and move on. This is, you see how we've styled those elements inside our HTML file? Yes, you can do that, but most of the time it's good practice to keep your style steps separate because this style.css file is going to get really large. The style is going to be so many when we have a bigger website. And so it's just good practice to create a different file called style.css. And that's what they've done here for us, right? So let's go ahead and create. So click on, come to the main folder here that we have. Instead of creating a new file directly, let's create another folder and let's call it Styles with an S. So this is just a folder, right? And now come to this folder and click on the file. So what this means is we're creating a new file inside this folder. So click on that and write styles.css and enter. So this creates a new file, right? So now we're going to copy everything we've done here and just paste it here like this. And remember how in the previous step we targeted the H1, the P, and the H2 like this. Let's save our changes and remove this style here. Okay, let's save our changes. And now let's check our site. What happened? So you see we went back to the original even though we have some style. Why is that? So let's go back to our Visual Studio Code. We have our styles, but why is it not styling the way we want? So that is because, remember, we created a separate file. So now this index file is not aware of the style.css. So somehow we have to find a way to let this index.html file know where to find the style. So that's going to be our next step. First, let's go back to FreeCodeCamp and just copy everything you have here into our style like this. Okay. And you can see the same thing just happened here. It went back to its original position. That is because this index.html is not aware of the changes or is not aware of this CSS file at all. So let's move on to the next challenge. Yes, let's go ahead and remove the style. Now we need to link our CS file to this HTML, and how you do it is by using another element called link. And this element have an attribute called rel. equal, and we need to give the location. We need to give the value of the name of our CSS file. So let's copy this and paste it here. And then it also needs an href. So href is the reference. Where do we find this style sheet file, right? So for this case, we find that in style.css. Put that here and close like this. And now it's applying our style to our index file, right? Let's do the same thing. Let's go to Visual Studio Code and apply what we've learned. So we use the link. So let's try to write link. Oh, it appeared, and just tap on enter. And you see how automatically it generates style sheet. And now you just have to give the location where your style.css file is. For our case is in a folder called styles. And you see how it's suggesting, yes, this is the right location. And now give it the name. When you go to this location, what name do you want to find? So it suggests here, just click on that and save your changes. Let's go back and look at the browser, and voila. Moving on, let's add this meta to our head element. So I'm just gonna copy that over here. And the viewport just means the screen, the whole screen. Sometimes you may be viewing a site on a mobile phone or on a desktop. So the screen, so just copy this and let's paste it over here. Okay, check your code, and yes. So basically this is just to allow or to let the browser know that the content would be the same. You want the user to have the same experience viewing your website on a mobile phone or on a desktop. So before we continue, go ahead and paste the same thing onto Visual Studio. And actually, I just realized you don't even have to do it here because it already did it for us. So we can just remove that. So now let's add some more style. Let's add a background color to the body. Remember, the body is going to be everything. So when you come to this, the body is going to be all this, right? So let's come over here and write our selector. Remember, a selector is one of the HTML element that you're trying to target. So for our case, it will be our body, curly braces, and write background color. And it says brown. And yay. All right, that looks good. So let's change that to burly wood. Okay, so let's learn about a new element called the div. So the div doesn't have any specific meaning. It's usually used for our own kind of sanity. It's a way to organize our content in our HTML file, but it's also used for design purposes. So let's create our div. All right, so let's learn about a new element called the div. So Step 20, they want us to add a div element inside the body and then move all the other elements inside the new div. So we are going to move everything, Command X, inside our div, just like this. All right, and then let's give this div an ID of menu. Two things about IDs is that IDs are unique, so you cannot find another div with a menu ID, okay? And also IDs are a way to identify that, okay, this div is called menu. And we are going to use this ID to style the whole div, okay? Let's check your code. All right, this is it for today's video. And just a quick summary. Today, we set up our coding environment by downloading Visual Studio Code, Chrome, and a few extensions to make our coding experience more enjoyable. We've also spoke about styling basic HTML elements such as link, which enable us to let the HTML file be aware of where our styles.css is located. And we looked into the structure of an HTML document. Next, coming up, we have continuing our journey into building our cafe menu. So subscribe, like, share, comment down below if you have any questions, and I'll be more than happy to